And in this corner, ladies, gentlemen, and beings of indeterminate gender, we have the pride of the Zorgak system, the terror of 1,000 worlds, the beast that makes even the bravest Kzinti warrior soil their battle skirts. The dreaded fanged beast of Nibiru IV. The announcer's voice boomed through the massive arena, a curious mix of excitement and barely concealed terror. The crowd, a motley assortment of aliens from across the galaxy, collectively held their breath, or whatever passed for breathing in their respective physiologies. A massive steel cage was wheeled onto the stage, covered in heavy black cloth. Whatever was inside snarled and thrashed, causing the entire structure to shake violently. Several of the smaller alien species in the front row fainted on the spot, while others began frantically searching for the nearest exit. Now, don't panic, the announcer continued, his voice cracking slightly. We have top-notch security measures in place. Probably. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? A nervous titter rippled through the audience. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Or dreading, depending on your species' fight or flight response. Let's meet our brave contestant who claims they can tame this nightmare incarnate. A spotlight swung to the side of the stage, illuminating a lone figure. The crowd gasped in confusion. Is that? It can't be. By the 7 moons of Rigel, it's a human. Indeed, standing there with a casual smirk and what appeared to be a small fabric bag was a human woman. She gave a jaunty wave to the audience, who responded with a mixture of awe and horror. That's right, folks, the announcer bellowed. Straight from the death world known as Earth, we have Sarah Johnson, who claims she can not only tame the Fang Beast but turn it into what was it again? A good boy. Whatever that means. Sarah stepped forward, her grin widening. Actually, she said, her voice amplified by the arena's sound system, I prefer good girl, pretty sure our friend in there is female. The announcer blinked all 7 of his eyes in rapid succession. Right, of course. How silly of me to assume the gender of a nightmarish killing machine. So Sarah, are you ready to meet your, new friend? Sarah nodded, reaching into her bag. Oh, you bet. I've been looking forward to this all week. The crowd watched in fascinated horror as the human calmly approached the cage. The snarling and thrashing inside intensified, and even the burly alien guards assigned to keep the cage steady began to back away. Now, remember folks, the announcer said, his voice trembling slightly, in the event of an escape, please proceed calmly to the nearest airlock and jettison yourselves into the cold vacuum of space. It's a quicker death than… Oh, for Pete's sake, Sarah interrupted, rolling her eyes. Can we get on with it? Some of us have dinner plans later, the announcer gulped audibly. All right. On the count of 3, we'll unveil the beast. 1, 2, 3, Sarah shouted, yanking the cloth off herself. The arena erupted in screams as the Fang Beast was revealed in all its terrifying glory. It was a mass of writhing tentacles, razor-sharp claws, and gnashing teeth. Multiple eyes glowed with murderous intent, and a thick, venomous drool dripped from its many maws. Sarah, however, seemed utterly unimpressed. Well, aren't you just the cutest little thing, she cooed, reaching into her bag. The beast roared, a sound that caused several support beams in the arena to crack. It lunged at the bars of its cage, its claws leaving deep gouges in the reinforced metal. Or, is someone a bit cranky, Sarah asked, her tone eerily reminiscent of someone talking to a toddler. I bet you're just hungry, aren't you? The entire audience watched in slack-jawed disbelief as Sarah pulled out a small purple ball. Who wants the ball? She asked in a sing-song voice. Who's a good girl who wants the ball? The Fang Beast paused mid-roar, its numerous eyes focusing on the tiny object in Sarah's hand. A confused whimper escaped its primary mouth. That's right, Sarah continued, slowly opening the cage door. The guards had long since abandoned their posts and were cowering behind the announcer's podium. It's all yours if you behave. She tossed the ball into the cage. The Fang Beast, terror of 1,000 worlds, reducer of mighty warriors to quivering masses of fear, tentatively reached out with one clawed appendage and batted at the ball like an oversized kitten. What? What is happening? The announcer whispered, voicing the collective thought of every being in the arena. Sarah turned to the audience with a grin. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, allow me to introduce you to the wonders of fetch. What followed was 15 minutes that would go down in galactic history. The crowd watched in awe as Sarah Johnson, armed with nothing more than a squeaky toy and an endless supply of patience, transformed the most feared predator in the known universe into what could only be described as an eager-to-please puppy. By the end of her allotted time, Sarah was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the cage, the fanged beast's massive head in her lap as she scratched behind what passed for its ears. The beast purred contentedly, a sound that resembled a malfunctioning starship engine. "And there you have it," folks, the announcer said, having finally regained his composure and changed into a fresh pair of trousers. "The impossible has been achieved. The human has tamed the untamable." The crowd erupted in cheers, their earlier terror forgotten in the face of this miracle. Sarah stood up, gave the fanged beast one final pat, and sauntered out of the cage. "So," she said casually, "I guess this means I win." The announcer nodded vigorously. "Oh, absolutely. You've won the grand prize of 10 million galactic credits, a luxury starship, and the eternal gratitude of every sentient being in the universe." Sarah grinned. "Cool. But, I hope you don't mind if I make one small addition to my winnings." The announcer blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Sarah jerked her thumb towards the cage, where the fanged beast was now curled up, snoring peacefully. "I'm keeping her. Already picked out a name and everything. Meet Fluffy, my new pet." And that, dear readers, was how humanity inadvertently conquered the galaxy. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but with squeaky toys, belly rubs, and the inexplicable ability to befriend anything with more teeth than brain cells. 6 months later, in a cozy apartment on Earth, Fluffy. How many times do I have to tell you? No eating the mailman. Sarah Johnson stood in her front yard, hands on hips, glaring sternly at the sheepish-looking monstrosity that was currently trying and failing to hide behind a tree. The fanged beast of Nibiru IV, once the most feared predator in the galaxy, now looked about as threatening as a scolded puppy, which, in a way, she was. "I swear," Sarah muttered, marching over to gently pry a terrified postal worker from one of Fluffy's smaller mouths. "It's like you forget every basic manner I teach you the moment a new chew toy walks by." Fluffy made a sound that was half whimper, half eldritch abomination. "Oh no, don't you try that sad eyes routine on me," young lady, Sarah said, wagging a finger. "You know better. Now, apologize to the nice man whose leg you were about to digest." Fluffy turned all 17 of her eyes towards the trembling mailman and let out a soft, apologetic growl. "There," Sarah said brightly to the mailman, who looked like he was one mild surprise away from a heart attack. "She's sorry. Aren't you, Fluffy?" Fluffy nodded her mane head enthusiastically, causing several nearby trees to sway dangerously in the breeze created by her movement. "Right," the mailman said faintly. "Of course, no harm done. I'll just be going now. Lots of mail to deliver. Very important. Can't be late." As the man sprinted away at a speed that would make Olympic athletes jealous, Sarah turned back to her oversized pet. "Now, what am I going to do with you? This is the third mailman this week, Fluffy. If you keep this up, they're going to start delivering our packages by drone." Fluffy let out a mournful howl that shattered every window on the block. Sarah sighed, reaching up to scratch the beast behind one of her more accessible ears. I know, you're just playing. But humans are fragile, remember? We've talked about this." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and groaned. "Oh, for the love of... Fluffy, did you eat Mrs. Abernathy's Pomeranian again?" Fluffy had the good grace to look ashamed, or at least as ashamed as a multi-ton, multi-mouthed horror from beyond the stars could look. "That's it," Sarah declared. "We're going to the park. You clearly need to work off some energy, and I need to apologize to the neighborhood association. Again." 10 minutes later, Sarah was strolling down the sidewalk, Fluffy trotting happily beside her. Well, trotting might be a bit of an understatement. Each step the alien beast took caused small tremors, setting off car alarms and causing pedestrians to dive for cover. "You know," Sarah mused as they walked, "when I entered that galactic pet show, I didn't exactly plan on coming home with the universe's most wanted. I was thinking more along the lines of a space hamster or something." Fluffy made a questioning noise, tilting her primary head. "Oh, don't get me wrong," Sarah added quickly. "I wouldn't trade you for all the space hamsters in the cosmos. It's just, well, you've certainly made life interesting." As if to prove her point, A passing jogger took one look at Fluffy and promptly fainted. Sarah sighed. Case in point. Come on, help me drag him to the side of the road. And no, you can't keep him as a snack. By the time they reached the park, news of their approach had clearly spread. The usually bustling green space was eerily empty, save for a few brave or foolish souls who had decided to stick around and see the show. All right, Fluffy, Sarah said, reaching into her pocket. You know the drill. Fetch. She pulled out what looked like a normal tennis ball and threw it with all her might. Fluffy's eyes lit up literally, with an otherworldly glow, and she took off after the ball, leaving deep furrows in the grass with each bound. The few remaining parkgoers watched in a mixture of terror and fascination as the nightmarish creature from beyond the stars played fetch like an oversized, tentacled Labrador. Is that safe? A trembling voice asked from behind Sarah. She turned to see a young man clutching a clipboard, his official-looking badge identifying him as part of the city's parks department. Oh, absolutely, Sarah replied with a casual wave. Fluffy's as gentle as a lamb. Well, a lamb with 17 rows of teeth and a fondness for devouring souls. But gentle, the man gulped. Right. It's just, we've been getting some complaints about the, property damage. Sarah glanced over to where Fluffy was currently uprooting a century-old oak tree in her enthusiasm to retrieve the ball. Ah, Sarah said. Yes, I can see how that might be a concern. Just then, Fluffy bounded back, dropping the slightly mangled tennis ball at Sarah's feet, along with half of the oak tree. Good girl, Sarah exclaimed, giving Fluffy an affectionate pat on one of her less spiky appendages. Though maybe next time, leave the landscaping as you found it, okay? Fluffy let out a happy roar that caused several birds to fall from the sky in shock. The Parks Department employee looked like he was seriously reconsidering his career choices. Ms. Johnson, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to. He was cut off by a sudden commotion at the edge of the park. A group of people were running towards them, waving their arms and shouting. What now? Sarah muttered. As the group got closer, Sarah realized they weren't running away from Fluffy, the usual reaction, but towards her. And they looked excited? Ms. Johnson, one of them called out, slightly out of breath. Thank goodness we found you. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Can I help you? The leader of the group, a harried-looking woman in a sharp business suit, stepped forward. My name is Dr. Evelyn Cross. I'm with the Interstellar Diplomatic Corps. We need your help. Urgently. Sarah blinked. My help? With what? Dr. Cross took a deep breath. An alien delegation has arrived in orbit. They're threatening to destroy Earth unless we can prove our worth to the galactic community. Sarah glanced at Fluffy, who was now contentedly chewing on the remains of the tennis ball and possibly a small piece of the space-time continuum. And you came to me because Dr. Cross said, her eyes fixed on Fluffy, their leader is apparently an old acquaintance of your pet. Sarah's eyes widened. Oh no, please don't tell me. I'm afraid so. Dr. Cross nodded grimly. The delegation is from Nibiru IV, and they want their god back. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. Their god? Of course. Because why wouldn't the galaxy's most terrifying predator also be a deity? Fluffy, did you forget to mention something? Fluffy had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, letting out a soft whine that caused several small earthquakes in neighboring states. Right, Sarah sighed. I don't suppose they'd be willing to accept a strongly worded letter explaining that Fluffy's happy here and doesn't want to go back to being a world-ending monstrosity. The look on Dr. Cross's face suggested that this was, in fact, not an option. Fine, Sarah said, straightening up. I guess we're going to save the world. Again. Fluffy, come on, girl. Time to go meet your old worshippers. As they made their way out of the park, leaving a trail of destruction and confused parkgoers in their wake, Sarah couldn't help but chuckle. You know, she said to Fluffy, who was trotting along happily beside her, when I was a kid, I always wanted a dog. Somehow, I don't think this is quite what my parents had in mind when they said maybe when you're older. Fluffy let out a sound that might have been a laugh, if laughter typically caused nearby buildings to vibrate ominously. Still, Sarah continued, reaching up to scratch behind one of Fluffy's many ears. I wouldn't have it any other way. Now, let's go show these aliens what happens when you mess with Earth. And more importantly, What happens when you try to separate a girl from her best friend? And so, Sarah Johnson and Fluffy, the most unlikely duo in the galaxy, set off to save the world. Again, because that's just what you do when you're a human with a pet that could eat planets for breakfast. As they walked and occasionally levitated, because Fluffy got excited sometimes, Sarah found herself musing on the strange turn her life had taken. You know, Fluffy, she said, ducking to avoid a low-hanging tentacle, when I entered that galactic pet show, I was really just hoping to win enough money to pay off my student loans. Intergalactic diplomacy wasn't exactly on my to-do list. Fluffy made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a snicker. Oh, don't you start, Sarah said, rolling her eyes. This is at least 50% your fault. If you hadn't been so darn cute, I might have left you in that cage. Fluffy had the audacity to look offended, all 17 of her eyes blinking in perfect synchronization. Don't give me that look, Sarah chuckled. You know you're adorable, in a could devour a small moon kind of way. As they approached the designated meeting point, a hastily cordoned-off area in the middle of Central Park, Sarah couldn't help but notice the increasing number of black SUVs and men in suits with earpieces. The government was clearly taking this seriously. MS. Johnson, a stern-looking man in a crisp suit, approached them. I'm Agent Thompson, head of security for this operation. We need to brief you on the protocol for. He was cut off as Fluffy, excited by the new person, extended one of her smaller tentacles for a handshake. The tentacle was roughly the size of a redwood tree. Agent Thompson went pale. Is that thing safe? Sarah grinned. Oh, absolutely. Fluffy, shake hands nicely. To his credit, Agent Thompson only flinched slightly as the massive appendage gently wrapped around his entire torso, lifting him a few feet off the ground in what could generously be called a handshake. See, Sarah said brightly. Gentle as a lamb, his right. Agent Thompson wheezed as Fluffy set him down. MS. Johnson, perhaps we could speak privately for a moment. Sarah nodded, turning to her oversized pet. Fluffy, stay. And no eating any of the nice agents, okay. Fluffy let out a mournful whine but obediently sat down, causing a minor seismic event in the process. As Sarah followed Agent Thompson to a nearby tent, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from the gathered officials and scientists. Energy readings off the charts. All defies all known laws of physics. Could revolutionize our understanding of the universe. Or destroy us all, Sarah sighed. It was going to be a long day. Inside the tent, a group of serious-looking individuals were huddled around a holographic display. Dr. Cross was there, along with what appeared to be several high-ranking military officials and a man who looked suspiciously like the president's science advisor. Ah, MS. Johnson, Dr. Cross said, looking relieved. Thank you for coming so quickly. We've just received an update from the Nibiran delegation. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. They're getting impatient and have decided to warm up their planet-destroying death ray. The gathered officials exchanged nervous glances. Not exactly, Dr. Cross said slowly. They've agreed to send down a representative to negotiate. Face to face. Sarah blinked. Oh, well, that's good, right? Talking is better than, global annihilation. Ordinarily, yes, Agent Thompson interjected. But their choice of representative is concerning. How so? Dr. Cross took a deep breath. They're sending down their high priest. Apparently, he's the only one among them who can communicate directly with their, God. Sarah glanced out of the tent flap, where Fluffy was currently amusing herself by juggling several uprooted trees. Ah, I see how that might be a problem. MS. Johnson, the man Sarah assumed was the science advisor, spoke up. We need to know everything you can tell us about Fluffy's abilities, weaknesses, anything that might give us an edge if negotiations go south. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. Weaknesses? She's ticklish behind her third left ear and has a fondness for bacon-flavored treats. But somehow I don't think that's going to help much in interstellar diplomacy. The gathered officials looked at her in disbelief. Look, Sarah said, her tone growing serious. I know this all seems crazy. Trust me, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it most days. But Fluffy isn't a weapon or a threat. She's my friend. And right now, she might be our best chance at avoiding an interplanetary incident. Just then, a young aide burst into the tent. They're here. The Nibiruan ship just entered the atmosphere. Sarah took a deep breath. Well, folks, showtime. Let's go introduce some aliens to the concept of man's best friend, or in this case, humanity's best eldritch abomination. As they exited the tent, Sarah was greeted by a sight that would have been comical if it weren't so potentially apocalyptic. Fluffy, in all her tentacled glory, was sitting primly, or as primly as a mountain-sized horror could sit in the middle of the park. Around her, a circle of heavily armed soldiers stood at the ready, their weapons trained on the sky. And descending from that sky, in a ship that looked like it was designed by someone with a severe case of arachnophobia and too much time on their hands, were the Nibiruans. The ship landed with surprising grace for something that appeared to be made entirely of angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. A hatch opened, and out stepped. Well, stepped might be generous. It was more of a slither-float-ooze combination. The High Priest of Nibiru IV was a sight to behold. Imagine, if you will, a cross between a jellyfish, a chandelier, and your worst acid-induced nightmare. Now make it sentient and give it a god complex. That's about half as weird as what Sarah was looking at. Greetings. Insignificant specks, the High Priest's voice boomed, despite the fact that Sarah couldn't see anything resembling a mouth. We have come to reclaim our divine overlord, the scourge of 1,000 worlds, the devourer of realities. The High Priest's dramatic monologue was cut short by an excited bark from Fluffy. Before anyone could react, the beast formerly known as the Terror of the Galaxy bounded over to the alien delegation, her numerous tails wagging with enough force to generate a small windstorm. Fluffy, no, Sarah called out, more out of habit than any real hope of being obeyed. The soldiers tensed, fingers on triggers. The assembled scientists and officials held their breath, and the High Priest of Nibiru IV screamed like a little girl, or at least the alien equivalent, which sounded like a subway car full of angry cats being fed through a wood chipper. Fluffy, oblivious to the interstellar crisis she was potentially causing, proceeded to give the High Priest an enthusiastic licking with one of her smaller tongues. The alien dignitary, for his part, seemed to be trying to melt into the ground. Literally. "I am so sorry," Sarah said, rushing forward. She gets excited around new people. Fluffy, heel. Oh, to everyone's surprise and the visible relief of the High Priest, Fluffy obeyed, trotting back to Sarah's side with a happy gurgle that caused several nearby trees to wilt. The High Priest, or what was left of him, after Fluffy's enthusiastic greeting, pulled himself together, literally. Again. What is the meaning of this sacrilege?" he sputtered, his gelatinous form quivering with what might have been rage, or fear, or indigestion. It was hard to tell with an alien that looked like a lava lamp having an existential crisis. Sarah stepped forward, trying her best to look diplomatic, which, given that she was standing next to a creature that could probably swallow Manhattan without getting indigestion, was a bit of a challenge. "Your, Holiness," she began, hoping she wasn't committing some horrific alien faux pas. "I'm Sarah Johnson, and this is Fluffy, who I believe you know as, what was it? The scourge of 1,000 worlds." The High Priest's many eyes, at least. Sarah assumed they were eyes. They could have been very aggressive beauty marks for all she knew, blinked in rapid succession. This is impossible," he declared. "Our God, our terrible and mighty deity, reduced to a common house pet." Fluffy, hearing the word pet, perked up. One of her many tails began to wag, causing a small tornado to form over New Jersey. "Now wait just a minute," Sarah said, feeling oddly defensive. "There's nothing common about Fluffy. She's one of a kind. And she's not just a pet, she's family." The High Priest made a sound that might have been a scoff, if scoffs typically caused small objects to spontaneously combust. "Family? This beast has laid waste to entire systems. It has devoured civilizations whole. It is the embodiment of cosmic terror." Sarah crossed her arms, unimpressed. "Yeah, well, she also likes belly rubs and plays a mean game of fetch. Your point." The gathered humans and aliens alike watched this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. It wasn't every day you saw someone sass an alien priest while standing next to a creature that could probably use planets as chew toys. The High Priest's gelatinous form rippled in what might have been indignation. "You do not understand the gravity of this situation, human. Our entire civilization is built around the worship of this entity. Our laws, our culture, our very existence revolves around appeasing its terrible hunger." Sarah raised an eyebrow. So, you're telling me your entire society is basically a giant game of the floor is lava, except the lava is a cosmic horror that might eat you at any moment. Precisely, the high priest exclaimed, seemingly glad that someone finally understood. That sounds exhausting, Sarah said, absently scratching Fluffy behind one of her many ears. The beast let out a contented rumble that caused several car alarms to go off in the distance. It is our way, the high priest intoned solemnly. And now you have disrupted the cosmic balance. You have domesticated chaos itself. Do you have any idea of the consequences? Sarah thought for a moment. Well, my vacuum cleaner's never been the same since Fluffy shed her winter coat. Does that count? The high priest made a sound that might have been a groan of frustration, if groans typically caused small rifts in the space-time continuum. Look, Sarah said, her tone softening. I get it. Really, I do. Change is scary. Especially when that change involves finding out that the big bad monster under your planet's bed is actually just a big softie who likes tummy rubs. But maybe this is a good thing. The high priest's many eyes blinked in confusion. A good thing? How could this possibly be a good thing? Sarah grinned. Well, for starters, you don't have to worry about being eaten anymore. That's got to be a plus, right? Fluffy, as if to emphasize the point, let out a happy bark. Several nearby birds fell out of the sky in shock, but notably, no one was devoured. But our entire way of life, the high priest stammered, can change. Sarah finished for him. Look at it this way, you've spent generations living in fear, trying to appease something you thought was a mindless engine of destruction. But Fluffy's not mindless. She's smart, she's loyal, and yeah, she can still probably eat a planet if she really put her mind to it. But she chooses not to, because she's found something better. Better than devouring worlds, the high priest asked, his tone a mix of disbelief and... Was that a hint of hope? Sarah nodded. Friendship. Love. The joy of a really good game of fetch with a tennis ball the size of a small moon. Trust me, it's a much better way to live. The high priest was silent for a long moment, his gelatinous form rippling with what might have been deep thought. Or indigestion, it was still hard to tell. Finally, he spoke. You may have a point, human. But what of our people? Our entire society is built around the fear and worship of the great devourer. What are we to do now? Sarah grinned. Well, how about we start with a cultural exchange? I'm sure there's a lot Earth could learn from Nibiru IV and vice versa. And who knows? Maybe Fluffy here can be a bridge between our worlds. A sort of intergalactic therapy dog. Fluffy, hearing her name, let out an excited bark that caused several small earthquakes, but notably, still no devouring. The high priest considered this for a moment. A cultural exchange. Yes, perhaps that could work. But tell me, human Sarah, what guarantee do we have that the great dev, that Fluffy will not one day return to her old ways? Sarah's expression turned serious. The same guarantee you have with any friendship. Trust, love, and a really, really big supply of bacon-flavored treats. As if on cue, Fluffy gently nuzzled Sarah with one of her smaller heads. The gesture would have been heartwarming if it hadn't also knocked Sarah off her feet. Sorry about that, folks, Sarah said, picking herself up and dusting off her clothes. Still working on the whole gentle thing. But you see? Progress. The high priest's gelatinous form seemed to soften slightly. Perhaps there is wisdom in your words, human Sarah. Our people have lived in fear for so long. The idea of a future without that constant dread is intriguing. Sarah beamed. That's the spirit. Now, how about we discuss this cultural exchange over some tea? I make a mean Earl Grey, though we might need to find a bigger teacup for Fluffy. And so, in a turn of events that would have made Douglas Adams proud, the fate of two worlds was decided over tea and cosmic horror-sized dog biscuits in Central Park. As the human and Nibiruan delegations began to mingle, with scientists excitedly exchanging notes and diplomats hurriedly drafting the first interstellar peace treaty that included clauses about proper tentacle etiquette, Sarah found herself sitting on a park bench, Fluffy's enormous head resting in her lap. Well, girl, she said, scratching behind one of Fluffy's many ears, I'd say that went pretty well, all things considered. Crisis averted, world saved, and we didn't even have to use the rolled-up newspaper. Though I'm still not sure where we're going to find a pooper scooper big enough for you. Fluffy, let out a contented rumble that caused ripples in nearby ponds. As Sarah watched the sun set over the New York skyline, casting a golden glow over the surreal scene of humans and aliens mingling in the park, she couldn't help but chuckle. You know, Fluffy, she mused, when I was a kid dreaming of going to space, this isn't exactly what I had in mind. But, I've got to say, it's a lot more interesting than anything NASA could have cooked up. Fluffy's response was to gently lick Sarah's face with a tongue roughly the size of a city bus. Oh, I love you too, you big goofball, Sarah laughed, wiping alien slime from her cheek. Now, what do you say we head home? I think we've had enough excitement for one day, and I promised Mrs. Abernathy we'd help her look for her Pomeranian. As they stood to leave, Sarah paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. Oh, and Fluffy. Next time an alien species shows up claiming you're their god, maybe give me a heads up first, okay? I'll need time to prepare a PowerPoint presentation on So Your Cosmic Horror is Now a House Better Guide to Interstellar Pet Ownership. Fluffy's response was a happy bark that shattered every window within a 5-block radius. Just another day in the life of Sarah Johnson, proud owner of the galaxy's most improbable pet. As they made their way home, leaving behind a park full of bewildered humans, awestruck aliens, and one very confused squirrel who was pretty sure acorns weren't supposed to spontaneously transmogrify into miniature galaxies, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Sure, her life had taken a turn for the weird. And yes, she was probably going to be getting some strongly worded letters from the Homeowners Association about the eldritch abomination living in her backyard. But at the end of the day, she'd made a friend, saved a world or two, and proven that even the most terrifying cosmic horrors just need a little love and a lot of patience. Plus, she was pretty sure she'd just invented an entirely new field of diplomacy. Intergalactic pet therapy had a nice ring to it. As they rounded the corner onto her street, Sarah glanced up at Fluffy, who was happily trotting along, each step causing small tremors that were probably playing havoc with the city's subway system. You know what, Fluffy, she said with a grin. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. A weird, probably reality-bending, definitely property damage-inducing friendship, but a beautiful one nonetheless. Fluffy's response was to nuzzle Sarah affectionately, nearly knocking her into a passing car in the process. Whoa. Easy there, girl, Sarah laughed, regaining her balance. Remember, we talked about this, gently. Like you're trying not to pop a soap bubble, except the soap bubble is, me. As they approached Sarah's house, she couldn't help but notice the crowd of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, their expressions a mix of terror, awe, and what might have been resignation. Living next door to the owner of a cosmic horror-turned-house pet had certainly made the neighborhood watch meetings more interesting. Evening, everyone, Sarah called out cheerfully. Don't mind us, just coming back from averting an interplanetary crisis. You know, the usual Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Abernathy, a spry octogenarian who had long since given up on maintaining a perfect lawn, it's hard to keep grass alive when your neighbor's pet occasionally drools acid, stepped forward. Sarah, dear, she said, her voice impressively steady for someone addressing a young woman, standing next to a creature that could probably use skyscrapers as toothpicks. I don't suppose you've had any luck finding Fifi. Sarah winced. Right, the missing Pomeranian. Ah, about that, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm afraid we got a bit sidetracked with the whole aliens wanting their god back thing. But don't worry, we'll start looking first thing in the morning. Right, Fluffy? Fluffy let out an eager bark that caused several car alarms to go off and a flock of geese to change their migration plans. Mrs. Abernathy nodded sagely, as if this was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I see. Well, do be careful. You know how Fifi gets around loud noises. Sarah bit back a laugh. If Fifi had survived this long in a neighborhood that regularly experienced Fluffy-induced seismic events, the little dog was made of sterner stuff than anyone gave her credit for. You will do, Mrs. Abernathy. And hey, if you're free tomorrow, why don't you join us for tea? We're hosting some out-of-town guests. I think you'll find them fascinating. As Sarah and Fluffy made their way up the driveway, leaving behind a group of neighbors who were seriously considering whether their home insurance covered act of domesticated cosmic horror, she couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. Sure, her life had taken a turn for the bizarre. And yes, she was probably going to have a serious talk with Fluffy about the importance of not accidentally creating black holes while chasing squirrels. But at the end of the day, she had a loyal friend, an exciting new career in interstellar diplomacy, and the knowledge that she'd made the universe a slightly weirder, but ultimately better place. Plus, she was pretty sure she could write one hell of a book about all this. How to Train Your Eldritch Abomination had bestseller written all over it. As they stepped into the house, Sarah gave Fluffy an affectionate pat on one of her less spiky appendages. "Well, girl, I'd say we've earned ourselves a quiet night in. What do you say to some Netflix and interdimensional snacks?" Fluffy's enthusiastic response caused the house to shake slightly on its foundations. Just another normal evening in the Johnson household. And as Sarah settled in for a night of binge-watching with her improbable pet, she couldn't help but smile. Life with Fluffy might be chaotic, occasionally terrifying, and definitely a violation of several laws of physics, but she wouldn't have it any other way. After all, every girl needs a best friend. Even if that best friend happens to be a former cosmic horror with a fondness for belly rubs and the ability to accidentally rewrite reality while chasing a tennis ball. Just another day in the life of Sarah Johnson, proud owner of the galaxy's most improbable pet and unofficial ambassador to the stars. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. And it was a humor best appreciated with a loyal friend by your side and a really, really big pooper scooper at the ready.